Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I should never have asked the Ouija board about my childhood home. Hey Reddit, I've been lurking here for years, reading all your creepy experiences and thinking they were just stories. But now, I have one of my own. And it's not just a story, it's my nightmare. Last weekend, my buddies and I decided to mess around with a Ouija board. Yeah, I know, real original, right? We were drunk, bored, and it seemed like a fun way to kill time. I wish I could go back and slap the board out of my hands. It all started so innocently. We lit some candles, turned off the lights, and started asking the usual dumb questions. Is anyone here? What's your name? You know, the usual. Then, in a haze of beer and bravado, I asked something that changed everything. Tell me something about my childhood home. At first, nothing happened. The planchette just sat there, still and silent. Then, it started to move. At first, I thought one of my friends was messing with me. But when I looked around, everyone seemed just as freaked out as I was. The board spelled out, "Look in the attic." My heart dropped. The attic was a place I'd never been allowed to go as a kid. My parents always said it was dangerous, full of old junk and weak floorboards. But now, drunk and stupid, I felt like I had to know what was up there. The Ouija board had spoken, and some twisted part of me felt compelled to listen. The next morning, with a pounding headache and a lingering sense of dread, I drove back to my childhood home. My parents had moved out years ago, but the house was still in the family, kept for storage and occasional visits. The place looked as creepy as ever, an old Victorian house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. Just standing in front of it made my skin crawl. I let myself in with the spare key hidden under the mat. The inside smelled like dust and memories. As I walked through the familiar rooms, I could almost hear the echoes of my childhood laughter and the stern voices of my parents warning me about the attic. But now, I had to know what was up there. I found the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. It took me a few tries to pull it down. The ladder was old and creaky, just like I remembered. I climbed up slowly, the rungs groaning under my weight. The attic was dark, but a sliver of sunlight filtered through a small, dirty window, casting eerie shadows across the cluttered space. Boxes and old furniture were piled everywhere, covered in decades of dust. I felt like I was disturbing something that had been left alone for a reason. The air was thick with neglect and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I started rummaging through the boxes, feeling more and more like an intruder with every passing second. Most of it was junk, old clothes, broken toys, forgotten knickknacks. Then, at the back of the attic, I found a trunk. It was old and heavy, with a rusty lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I forced it open, the lid creaking like a coffin. Inside, I found photos and letters, yellowed with age. They were all of my parents before I was born. At first, it was kind of sweet, seeing them young and in love. But then, I noticed something strange. There were pictures of a little girl I'd never seen before. She looked about my age, with long dark hair and a serious expression. There were no pictures of her with my parents, just her alone, in various places around the house. I dug deeper into the trunk, finding more photos, all of the same girl. My heart started to race. Who was she? Why had I never seen these before? Then, at the bottom of the trunk, I found a diary. It was small and leather-bound, with a broken lock. I opened it, my hands shaking. The diary belonged to the girl in the photos. Her name was Emily. The entries started off normal enough, childish musings about her day, her favourite toys, her friends. But as I read on, they became darker. She wrote about hearing whispers in the house, seeing shadows that didn't belong, feeling like she was being watched. The last entry made my blood run cold. It was dated the day before my parents moved into the house. "Mummy and Daddy are acting strange." They say we have to leave, but I don't want to go. The man in the walls says I can't leave. He says I belong to him now. I'm scared. I don't want to go into the dark, but Mummy and Daddy won't listen. They don't hear the whispers. They don't see the eyes. The rest of the page was smeared with something dark. Something that looked disturbingly like blood. I dropped the diary, my mind racing. Who was Emily? What had happened to her? And what did she mean? The man in the walls? I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, the attic felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I had to get out. I scrambled down the ladder, almost falling in my haste. I ran out of the house, not bothering to lock up behind me. I just needed to get away. As I drove back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone or something following me, but the road was empty. When I got home, I tried to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream, that the Ouija board had just messed with my head. But deep down, I knew better. I had awakened something in that house, something that had been sleeping for years, and now it knew about me. I spent the rest of the day trying to forget, but I couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the man in the walls. I needed answers. I called my parents, but they were evasive, saying they didn't want to talk about the past. They told me to leave it alone, to let sleeping dogs lie. But I couldn't. I had to know what had happened in that house. What had happened to Emily. That's when I decided to go back, to confront whatever was haunting my childhood home. But this time, I wouldn't go alone. I needed help. I reached out to a friend who was into paranormal stuff, hoping he could help me make sense of it all. And that's where things went from bad to worse. But I'll save that for part 2. Alright, so here's part 2 of my nightmare. If you're just joining, you might want to read part 1 first. Trust me, it sets the stage for the horror that's about to unfold. After my encounter in the attic, I was a mess. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the man in the walls. Every creak and shadow in my apartment felt like a sign that something was coming for me. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, so I called my friend, Jake. Jake is one of those guys who's really into the paranormal. Ghost hunting, urban legends, all that stuff. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. When I told Jake what had happened, he was surprisingly calm. He said he'd come over with some gear and we'd figure it out together. That night, Jake showed up with a backpack full of equipment, EMF meters, digital recorders, even a thermal camera. We set up in my living room and I told him everything. The Ouija board, the attic, the diary. Jake listened, nodding thoughtfully. "Sounds like we've got a classic haunting on our hands," he said, almost excited. "But the man in the walls, that's new. We'll need to tread carefully." We decided to head back to the house the next day. Jake insisted we go during the day to get a feel for the place before doing any real investigating. As we drove up to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The old Victorian loomed ahead, looking even more sinister in the daylight. We walked through the house, Jake taking readings with his equipment. The EMF meter spiked a few times, but nothing too alarming. It wasn't until we got to the attic that things started to get weird. As soon as we climbed the ladder, the temperature dropped. It was like stepping into a freezer. Jake's thermal camera confirmed it. The attic was significantly colder than the rest of the house. We started sifting through the boxes again, but this time we were looking for anything that could explain the strange occurrences. That's when we found it. Behind a stack of old books, there was a small door in the wall. It was barely noticeable, blending in with the wooden panels. The door was locked, but the key was hanging right next to it, as if someone wanted it to be found. Jake and I exchanged glances. "You ready for this?" he asked. I nodded, though every fibre of my being was screaming at me to run. Jake unlocked the door and we pushed it open. The smell hit us first, a musty, rotting odour that made me gag. The room beyond was small and dark, with just enough space for a person to crouch. Inside, there were old, tattered blankets, a few toys, and drawings covering the walls. Drawings of a man with long, spindly fingers. and hollow eyes. The man in the walls. My heart was pounding. This was where Emily had been. But why? What had happened to her? Jake was snapping pictures, his hands shaking. This is messed up, man. Really messed up. He pulled out his digital recorder and started asking questions, hoping to capture some EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Is anyone here with us? Emily, can you hear me? Who is the man in the walls? At first there was nothing but static. Then a faint whisper. Help me. Jake and I froze. We played the recording back, and there it was, clear as day. A child's voice pleading for help. My blood ran cold. We had to get out of there. We scrambled down the ladder and ran out of the house, not stopping until we were back in the car. I was shaking, my mind racing. What the hell was that? I asked, my voice trembling. Jake was pale. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not friendly. We need to do some research, figure out who Emily was and what happened here. Back at my apartment, we spent hours online, searching for any information about the house and its previous owners. We found an old newspaper article from the early 90s about a family that had lived there, a couple and their daughter, Emily. According to the article, Emily had gone missing one night and her parents had moved away shortly after, unable to cope with the loss. The case was never solved, but there was more. Digging deeper, we found rumours and urban legends about the house. Neighbours had reported strange noises, shadows moving in the windows, and a feeling of being watched. Some even claimed the house was cursed. Jake looked at me, his expression grim. I think whatever took Emily is still there, and now it knows about us. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face and the man in the walls. I kept hearing her voice, that desperate plea for help, and I knew we had to go back. We had to find out what happened to her and put an end to this. The next day, we prepared for another trip to the house. This time, we brought more equipment, salt, holy water, anything we thought might help. Jake even brought a Ouija board, hoping we could communicate with Emily directly. As we set up in the living room, the atmosphere felt charged, like the house was watching us, waiting. We started with the Ouija board, hoping to make contact with Emily again. The planchette moved almost immediately, spelling out, "Help me." Jake and I exchanged a look. "Emily, we're here to help you. Can you tell us what happened?" he asked. The planchette moved again, slowly, spelling out, "The man." "Who is the man?" Jake asked, his voice steady. "He lives in the walls." My heart was pounding. "Emily, where are you now? How can we help you?" The planchette hesitated, then spelled out, "Attic." We grabbed our gear and headed back up to the attic. The small door was still open, the room beyond as cold and dark as before. We set up the digital recorder and the thermal camera, hoping to capture anything that might help us understand what we were dealing with. "Emily, we're here. What do you need us to do?" Jake asked, his voice echoing in the small space. There was a long silence, and then the recorder picked up a faint whisper. "Save me." Jake and I looked at each other, determination in our eyes. We were going to save Emily, no matter what it took. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. And then we heard it. A scraping sound, coming from the walls. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails on wood. It was coming closer. My heart raced as I realised the man in the walls was coming for us. All right, Reddit, here's part 3 of my nightmare. If you've been following along, you know things have gotten really messed up. If not, you should probably read parts 1 and 2 first. Trust me, it's a hell of a ride. So there we were, in the attic of my childhood home, with the unmistakable sound of scraping coming from the walls. Jake and I were frozen, every hair on our bodies standing on end. It felt like time had stopped, and all I could think was, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into? The scraping grew louder, closer, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. A heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow all sound. Jake motioned for me to follow him, and we slowly backed out of the small room and down the attic ladder. Once we were back in the hallway, We barricaded the attic hatch with a heavy dresser, hoping it would keep whatever was in there from getting out. Back in the living room, we reviewed the footage and recordings from our equipment. The thermal camera had picked up a cold spot in the shape of a person standing in the corner of the small room. The digital recorder captured more whispers, though they were faint and hard to make out. But one thing was clear: Emily was not alone up there. We needed more information, and we needed help. Jake suggested we talk to someone who knew more about the house's history. There had to be someone in town who remembered the family that lived there before us. The next morning, we headed to the local library, hoping to find some records or newspaper clippings that could shed light on what happened. After hours of digging through dusty old files and microfilm, we found a few more articles about Emily's disappearance. The police had initially suspected the parents, but there was no evidence to support it. Eventually, the case went cold, and the family moved away. But there were also stories about strange occurrences in the house long before Emily's family lived there. Rumours of a man who had gone mad and bricked himself up in the walls, a dark presence that seemed to linger. We left the library with more questions than answers. Jake suggested we try to contact Emily's parents to see if they could tell us anything. It took some digging, but we eventually found an old address for them. It was a long shot, but we had to try. When we arrived at the address, an elderly woman answered the door. She looked tired and wary, like someone who had seen too much. "Are you Mrs. Adams?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "We're sorry to bother you," Jake said, stepping forward. "We're looking for information about your daughter, Emily. We think she might still be in the house." Her face went pale, and she started to close the door. "I don't know anything. Please, just leave us alone. Please," I begged. "We've seen things. We think she's trying to communicate with us. We just want to help her." She hesitated, then sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in." The inside of the house was dim and smelled of old books and mothballs. Mrs. Adams led us to a small sitting room and motioned for us to sit. "I never wanted to talk about this," she said, her voice shaky. "But if you've seen her, if she's still there," I nodded. "We found her diary. She wrote about a man in the walls." Mrs. Adams closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We tried to save her. We did everything we could, but the house, it's cursed. It took her, and we couldn't stop it." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. She took a deep breath, then began to tell us the story. Emily had always been a quiet, serious child, but after they moved into the house, she started to change. She became withdrawn, paranoid, and would often talk about seeing a man with long fingers and hollow eyes. They thought it was just a child's imagination, but then strange things started happening. Objects moving on their own, cold spots, whispers in the night. One night, Emily vanished. They searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of her. The police were called, but they found nothing. The only clue was a message scrawled on the wall of her bedroom. "He has me." "We never found out who or what took her," Mrs. Adams said, her voice breaking. "But I know it wasn't a person. It was something evil, and it's still there." We left the Adams house with a heavy sense of dread. It was clear that whatever was in that house had been there for a long time, and it wasn't going to let go of Emily or us without a fight. Back at my apartment, Jake and I tried to come up with a plan. We needed to confront whatever was in the walls and free Emily, but we had no idea how. We decided to gather as much information and protection as we could before going back. We researched rituals, protection spells, anything that might help us face the entity in the house. The next night, armed with salt, holy water, and a handful of protective charms, we returned to the house. The place felt even more sinister than before, the air thick with malevolence. We set up our equipment and sprinkled salt along the windows and doors, hoping it would keep the entity at bay. As we climbed the stairs to the attic, the temperature dropped again. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath our feet. We reached the attic and pushed aside the dresser we had used to barricade the hatch. The small door was still open, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. We stepped inside, and the whispers started immediately. This time, they were louder, more insistent. "Help me," Emily's voice pleaded, echoing around the small room. "We're here, Emily," Jake said, setting up the digital recorder. "We're going to help you. Just tell us what to do." The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to shift and writhe around us. The walls began to shake, and the drawings of the man with hollow eyes seemed to move, their eyes following us. Then, from behind the wall, we heard it. The slow, deliberate scraping of fingernails on wood. It was coming closer, and this time, it wasn't stopping. I felt a chill run down my spine as the wall behind the small door started to bulge and crack. "Jake, we need to get out of here," I whispered, my voice trembling, but Jake shook his head. "No, we need to finish this. We need to save her." The wall gave way, and a figure stepped out. He was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly fingers and hollow, empty eyes. The man in the walls. He moved towards us, his movements jerky and unnatural. Jake threw holy water at him, but it had no effect. The man kept coming, his eyes fixed on us with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "We need to go, now!" I shouted, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him towards the ladder. But it was too late. The man reached out with his long fingers, grabbing Jake and pulling him towards the darkness. Jake screamed, struggling to break free, but the man was too strong. I grabbed the salt and threw it at the man, hoping it would do something, anything, to stop him. The man hissed, his grip loosening just enough for Jake to break free. We scrambled down the ladder and ran out of the house, not stopping until we were safely in the car. As we drove away, I looked back and saw the man standing in the attic window, watching us with those hollow eyes. I knew this wasn't over. Emily was still trapped, and now the man knew who we were. We had to find a way to stop him, to save Emily and ourselves. But how? How do you fight something that isn't human? Something that's been lurking in the walls for decades? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. We couldn't let this go. We had to go back, to face the man in the walls and end this nightmare once and for all. Hey Reddit, thanks for sticking with me through this crazy ride. If you're just tuning in, make sure you catch up on parts 1, 2, and 3. This has been a hell of an experience, and it's far from over. After we destroyed the man in the wall's anchor, things were quiet for a while. Jake and I both tried to get back to our normal lives, but it wasn't easy. The nightmares still haunted us, and there was always that lingering fear that we hadn't truly ended it. A few weeks later, I got a call from my parents. They were planning to sell the old house, and they needed me to come by and help clean it out. Just hearing them talk about the house made my stomach churn, but I couldn't say no. They didn't know about everything that had happened, and I wanted to make sure nothing was left behind that could cause more trouble. I called Jake and he agreed to come with me. We met up at the house on a sunny Saturday morning. The place looked different somehow, less menacing, but still holding on to the echoes of what had happened. As we walked through the front door, memories of our encounters flooded back. But we pushed through, determined to get this over with. We started in the basement, sorting through old boxes and furniture. It was mostly junk, stuff my parents had forgotten about long ago. But as we moved through the house, we found more personal items, photo albums, letters, and keepsakes from my childhood. It was strange, seeing these remnants of a happier time in a place that had become so tainted by darkness. When we finally made our way to the attic, I felt a chill run down my spine. Even with the man in the walls gone, the attic still felt like the heart of the house's darkness. We climbed the ladder, and as I pushed open the hatch, a wave of cold air hit me. The small door to the hidden room was still open, but the space felt empty, devoid of the malevolent presence that had once lurked there. Jake and I started packing up the remaining items, carefully sifting through everything to make sure we didn't miss anything important. That's when we found it, a small, leather-bound journal hidden under a loose floorboard. It was old, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat. The journal belonged to Emily. As we read through the journal, it became clear that Emily had been documenting her experiences in the house. She wrote about the whispers, the shadows, and the man in the walls. But she also wrote about something else, something we hadn't encountered. She mentioned a dark room, a place she was drawn to but terrified of. According to her journal, the dark room was somewhere in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances. We thought we had ended this, but it seemed there was more to the story. We decided to investigate, hoping to find whatever Emily had been talking about, and finally put everything to rest. We headed back down to the basement, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. We tapped on the walls, listening for any hollow sounds that might indicate a hidden space. After what felt like an eternity, we found it. A section of the wall that sounded different. We pried it open, revealing a narrow passage leading into pitch blackness. The air inside the passage was thick and musty, and the walls were lined with strange symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal. As we moved deeper into the dark room, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. It was like walking into a tomb. At the end of the passage, we found a small chamber. In the center of the room was a crude altar, covered in melted candles and old, brittle bones. The walls were covered in more symbols, and the air was heavy with the stench of decay. This was the source of the house's darkness, the place where the malevolent spirit had been summoned or created. We took pictures of everything, documenting what we found. Marla had warned us that destroying the anchor might not be enough, that we needed to cleanse the source of the evil. We called her, explaining what we had found, and she agreed to come over and help us perform a final cleansing ritual. Marla arrived that evening, bringing with her more supplies: holy water, sage, black salt, and a silver dagger. We followed her into the dark room, and she began to prepare the ritual. The atmosphere was tense, the air crackling with energy. Marla started chanting, her voice echoing off the walls. She sprinkled black salt around the room, anointing the altar and bones with holy water. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. I felt a presence in the room, something angry and desperate, fighting against the ritual. As Marla continued to chant, Jake and I joined in, our voices rising in unison. The room shook, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. The candles flickered wildly, and the symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and twist. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the darkness, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and long, spindly fingers. The man in the walls. He lunged at Marla, but she held her ground, brandishing the silver dagger. "You have no power here," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. The man recoiled, hissing in fury. Marla advanced on him, the dagger glowing with a bright ethereal light. She plunged the dagger into the altar, and the room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The man screamed, a horrible, otherworldly sound, and then he was gone. The light faded, and the room fell silent. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. Marla collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. "It's over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The house is cleansed." We helped Marla out of the basement and into the fresh air. The night was calm, the stars shining brightly overhead. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over. In the days that followed, my parents sold the house, and life slowly returned to normal. But the memories of what we had faced would stay with me forever. Emily was finally at peace, and the malevolent spirit that had haunted the house was gone. But I knew that the darkness we had encountered was real, and that there were other places, other spirits out there. Jake and I made a pact to stay in touch, to keep an eye out for any signs of the supernatural. We had faced the darkness and survived, but we knew there were others who might not be so lucky. Our experience had changed us, and we were determined to use that knowledge to help others, and that's where I'll leave it for now. There's more to this story, and I'll share it in part 5. Thanks for sticking with me, Reddit. Stay safe and keep your eyes open. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Hey Reddit, thanks for sticking with me through this entire journey. If you're just jumping in, I strongly recommend you catch up on parts 1 through 4. This final part ties it all together, and you don't want to miss the build-up. So, after the cleansing ritual, life seemed to return to normal. My parents sold the house, and Jake and I tried to move on. We kept our pact though, and stayed in close contact. The memories of the man in the walls and Emily haunted us, but knowing we had put an end to it brought some peace, or so we thought. A few months later, I received an unexpected phone call from Jake. His voice was tense, almost panicked. "Dude, you need to come over. Now!" I arrived at his apartment and he led me inside without a word. He had his laptop open on the kitchen table and he showed me a series of emails he had received. They were from someone claiming to be Emily. At first I thought it was a cruel joke, but as I read through the emails, my blood ran cold. The emails detailed events that only Emily could have known. She described the attic, the diary, even the man in the walls with chilling accuracy. The last email was the most disturbing. "He's not gone. You missed something. Please come back." Jake and I stared at each other, the realization sinking in. We hadn't fully cleansed the house. The thought of going back was terrifying, but we knew we had no choice. Emily needed us, and we had to finish what we started. We called Marla, explaining the situation. She was reluctant at first, but agreed to help us once more. We gathered our gear, loading up on every protective item we could think of. This time, we were going in prepared for anything. As we approached the house, a sense of dread settled over us. The new owners hadn't moved in yet, so the house stood empty, waiting. Marla performed a quick cleansing at the entrance, and we stepped inside. Our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We headed straight for the basement, where we had found the dark room. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every step echoing ominously. The hidden passage was still there, but this time, the air inside was colder, almost freezing. We reached the chamber at the end, and Marla set up a new altar. She lit candles and began chanting, calling out to Emily. The room remained still, but a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Then, from the darkness, we heard a familiar voice. "Thank you for coming back." Emily's ghostly figure appeared, translucent and shimmering. She looked both relieved and terrified. "He's still here. You didn't destroy everything." Marla nodded, her face serious. "Show us what we missed." Emily pointed to the far wall, where the symbols seemed to writhe and twist. "Behind there, that's where he hides." Jake and I exchanged glances, then moved to the wall. We pried at the loose bricks, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside was a small blackened book, bound in what looked like human skin. The book pulsed with a malevolent energy, and just touching it made my skin crawl. Marla stepped forward, her expression grim. "This is it. This is his true anchor." She opened the book, revealing pages filled with dark rituals and incantations. "We need to destroy this, but it won't be easy." As Marla began the ritual, the air grew heavy, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. The walls shook, and a deep, guttural growl filled the space. The man in the walls appeared, his form more solid and terrifying than ever. "You cannot defeat me," he hissed, his eyes burning with rage. Marla didn't falter. She chanted louder, sprinkling the book with holy water and salt. The man lunged at her, but Jake and I formed a protective circle around her, holding him back with everything we had. The room seemed to pulse with dark energy, the temperature dropping to near freezing. Suddenly, the book burst into flames, the fire consuming it rapidly. The man in the walls let out a horrible, inhuman scream, his form flickering and fading. "No! You cannot do this!" he howled, but it was too late. The flames engulfed him, and with one final scream, he was gone. The room fell silent, the oppressive presence lifting. The temperature returned to normal, and the shadows receded. Marla collapsed, exhausted but triumphant. "It's done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's gone for good." Emily's figure appeared once more, a look of peace on her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "I can finally rest now." With that, she faded away, leaving us in the quiet, dark room. We made our way back upstairs, the house feeling lighter, almost welcoming. We had done it. We had freed Emily and destroyed the evil that had haunted the house for so long. In the weeks that followed, Jake and I kept in touch with Marla, but we didn't encounter any more paranormal activity. The house was eventually sold, and the new owners reported nothing but peace and quiet. I still think about Emily and the man in the walls sometimes. The experience changed me, made me realize that there are things out there we can't explain, things that go bump in the night. But knowing we made a difference, that we helped a lost soul find peace, makes it all worth it. So that's my story, Reddit. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole ordeal. And remember, if you ever find yourself face to face with the unknown, don't be afraid to reach out for help. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to set it free. Stay safe out there. After using a Ouija board, I can't stop seeing ghosts. Hey Reddit, I'm not usually one to post stuff like this, but I seriously need some help. I need someone to tell me what the hell is going on, because I'm losing my mind over here. This all started about a month ago, and I haven't had a single night of decent sleep since. I'm constantly paranoid. My friends think I'm crazy, and I'm beginning to wonder if they're right. I never believed in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap, but now I wish I still didn't. So, about a month ago, my friends and I were hanging out at my buddy Jake's place. We were bored, just messing around. You know how it goes. A few beers, some dumb YouTube videos, typical Friday night stuff. Out of nowhere, Jake pulls out this old, dusty Ouija board. He said he found it in his attic and thought it'd be fun to mess around with it. I was hesitant, but everyone else was all for it, so I caved in. Big mistake. We set it up in the middle of Jake's living room, lights dimmed for atmosphere or whatever. It was all fun and games at first, just a bunch of jokes and laughing. But then, things started to get weird. The planchette actually started moving. At first, I thought it was Jake or someone else messing with us, but it moved in ways that didn't make sense. Almost like it had a mind of its own. We asked the usual questions. Is anyone there? What's your name? You know, the typical stuff. It spelled out yes and then Michael. None of us knew any Michaels who had passed away, so we asked how he died. The board spelled out Murder. At this point, I was getting seriously creeped out, but Jake and the others thought it was hilarious. They kept pushing, asking who killed him. The planchette moved again, slowly this time, spelling out YOU. That's when the atmosphere changed. It felt like the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. We all looked at each other, nervous laughter dying in our throats. I tried to end the session, saying goodbye, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. Instead, it spelled out NO. Then, the lights flickered, and we heard this awful, guttural sound, like someone choking. The air got thick, and I swear I saw a shadow move across the room, even though no one was near that corner. Everyone freaked out, and we finally managed to push the planchette to goodbye together. We packed up the board, but the weirdness didn't stop there. That night, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I was in Jake's living room, but everything was dark and twisted. The walls were covered in this black, oozing substance, and there was this overwhelming smell of decay. In the center of the room was a figure, but I couldn't make out any details. It was just standing there, staring at me. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. The figure started to move closer, and as it did, I could hear whispers all around me, saying my name, telling me to run, but I couldn't. It reached out, and just before it touched me, I woke up in a cold sweat. I thought it was just a nightmare, a result of the creepy experience with the Ouija board. But then, I started seeing things when I was awake. It started small, shadows out of the corner of my eye, strange noises in my apartment. But then, it got worse. I'd see faces in the windows, reflections in mirrors that weren't mine. I could feel someone watching me all the time. I started sleeping with the lights on. but it didn't help. The figure from my nightmare began to appear, always in the darkest corners of my apartment, just staring at me. I'd blink and it would be gone, but I knew it was there, waiting. A few days ago, I was walking to my car after work, and I saw it again, standing in the middle of the parking lot. There were no shadows, nowhere for it to hide, but it was there, clear as day. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It slowly raised a hand and pointed at me, and I felt this intense, crushing dread. I managed to get in my car and drove home as fast as I could, but I knew it would be waiting for me when I got there. And it was. Last night was the worst. I was lying in bed, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things, that it was all in my head. I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of something scratching at my bedroom door. I tried to ignore it, but then the door started to creak open. I couldn't see anything, just darkness. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, and when I turned it on, the figure was right there, inches from my face. I could see its eyes, hollow and empty, staring into mine. It whispered my name, and I felt this cold hand wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Just as I felt like I was going to pass out, it disappeared, and I was left gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified to go home, but I can't keep running. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I can't keep living like this. Hey Reddit, thanks for all the replies on my last post. I appreciate the advice, but things have only gotten worse. I'm seriously losing it and I need to vent. Maybe writing it all down will help me process what's happening, or at least make it feel a little less real. I don't know. Here goes nothing. So after that night with the thing in my room, I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. I packed a bag and crashed at my buddy Mike's place for a few days. Mike's one of the few people who didn't think I was completely insane. He actually believed me, which was a huge relief. But even he couldn't protect me from whatever this thing is. The first night at Mike's, I managed to get a few hours of sleep, which was a miracle. But the next day, I saw it again. Mike and I were watching TV trying to relax when I saw a reflection in the screen. It was standing behind us, just watching. I jumped up, but of course, there was nothing there when I turned around. Mike looked at me like I was nuts, but then his face went pale. He said he felt something cold brush past him, like an icy breeze in the middle of the room. That freaked him out, and I could tell he was starting to regret letting me stay. The following night, I woke up to Mike screaming. I ran to his room and found him thrashing around in his bed, shouting about something grabbing him. I flipped on the light, and there were deep, red scratches all over his arms and chest, like claw marks. He was wide-eyed, shaking, and kept saying he saw the figure from my stories standing at the foot of his bed. We spent the rest of the night in his living room, all the lights on, neither of us daring to sleep. Mike's place wasn't safe anymore, so I had to leave. I didn't want to drag him any deeper into this nightmare. I went to stay at a motel on the edge of town, hoping that maybe a change of scenery would help, but it followed me. I don't know how it finds me, but it does. The motel room was dingy and smelled like mildew, but it was a place to crash. I barricaded the door with a chair and left the bathroom light on, trying to create some sort of safe space. But that night, I heard whispers coming from the other side of the room. Soft at first, like a distant conversation, but then louder, more insistent. They were saying my name over and over, and then they started laughing. It was this horrible, mocking laughter that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. The whispers stopped, but then I saw it. The figure, crouched in the corner, its hollow eyes fixed on me. It didn't move, just stared. I was frozen, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. Then, it started to crawl towards me, slow and deliberate. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I backed up until I was against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. It got closer and closer, until it was inches from my face. I could feel its cold breath on my skin. Then, It spoke. "You can't escape." Its voice was a rasping whisper, but it felt like it was echoing inside my head. I screamed, swinging my phone at it, and just like that, it was gone. I was alone in the room, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I packed my things and left the motel that night. I couldn't stay there another second. I've been driving around aimlessly since then, crashing in my car, trying to stay awake. But it doesn't matter where I go. It always finds me. The figure, the whispers, the cold dread, it's all there, waiting. I see it on the side of the road, in the rearview mirror, sometimes even in broad daylight. It's relentless. Yesterday, I called my mum, desperate for some kind of comfort. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was going through a rough patch. She suggested I come home for a while, and I almost took her up on it. But then, I remembered what happened to Mike. I can't drag anyone else into this. I have to deal with it on my own, somehow. Right now, I'm parked at a rest stop, trying to keep it together. I haven't slept in what feels like days, and I'm exhausted, but I can't let my guard down. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, waiting. I don't know how much more of this I can take. If anyone out there has dealt with something like this, please, tell me what to do. I can't keep running forever. Hey Reddit, thanks for sticking with me through all this. I wish I had better news, but things have only gotten worse. I'm barely holding on here. I don't know how much more I can take. Maybe writing this will help, or at least make it feel a little less like a nightmare I can't wake up from. After I left the rest stop, I drove aimlessly, trying to figure out my next move. Every time I felt like I was losing it, I'd remind myself that it was just a game, just a stupid Ouija board. But that logic doesn't hold up when you've seen what I've seen, when you've felt it. A few nights ago, I decided to drive to a different state. I thought maybe if I put enough distance between me and my apartment, I could shake this thing. I was wrong. I was driving through this small town I didn't even know the name of when I saw it again. It was standing on the side of the road, just staring at me as I sped past. No one else seemed to notice. It was like I was the only one who could see it. I found another cheap motel and checked in. The clerk gave me a weird look, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks, which, to be fair, I hadn't. I got to my room, locked the door, and tried to get some rest. I was so exhausted that I thought maybe, just maybe, I could sleep through the night. I was wrong. I woke up to the feeling of something cold wrapping around my ankles. I looked down and saw these pale, skeletal hands emerging from under the bed, gripping me tight. I screamed and kicked, but the hands only tightened their grip, pulling me down. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. I grabbed the edge of the bed, trying to pull myself up, but it was like fighting against a vice. The whispers started again, louder this time, almost deafening. "You can't escape. You belong to us now." I managed to kick free and scrambled off the bed, backing into a corner. The hands retreated, but the whispers continued, echoing around the room. I could see shadows moving, flickering in the corners of my vision. I was trapped and I knew it. I spent the rest of the night huddled in that corner, too terrified to move. When morning finally came, I grabbed my things and bolted. I didn't even check out. I just left. I've been driving ever since, stopping only for gas and food. I can't bring myself to stay in one place for too long. I started researching, looking for anything that could help me understand what's happening. I found stories of other people who messed with Ouija boards and experienced similar things, but none of them seemed as intense as what I'm dealing with. Some talked about cleansing rituals, burning sage, and even exorcisms. I'm willing to try anything at this point. I decided to visit a psychic. I know it sounds crazy, but I was desperate. Her name was Madame Zelda, and her place was exactly what you'd expect. Dimly lit, heavy curtains, the whole 9 yards. I told her what happened, and she looked genuinely concerned. She performed a reading and said there was a dark presence attached to me, something ancient and malevolent. She said it wasn't just a ghost, but something much worse. A demon, maybe. Madame Zelda gave me a list of things to do. burning sage, sprinkling salt around my bed, carrying protective crystals. She even gave me a talisman to wear. I followed her instructions to the letter, hoping something, anything would work, but it didn't. The thing, whatever it is, seemed to laugh at my attempts to ward it off. Last night was the worst yet. I was parked in a rest area trying to get some sleep. I had the talisman around my neck, sage in the car, salt sprinkled around. I thought I might finally be safe, but I woke up to the sound of scratching on the windows. It was pitch black outside, no moon, no stars, just darkness. I could see the silhouette of the figure, slowly dragging its fingers down the glass, making this horrible screeching sound. I turned on the car's interior light, hoping it would go away. It didn't. It just stood there, staring at me. Then it started to speak, but not in whispers this time. It was loud, echoing inside the car. "You can't escape. You will never be free." The windows fogged up, and I could see the words, "You belong to us," written in the condensation. I lost it. I started the car and sped out of there, not caring where I was going, just trying to get away. But it's no use. It's always there, always watching. I'm parked at a diner now, using their Wi-Fi to write this. I'm exhausted, terrified, and I don't know what to do. I can't keep running, but I can't go home either. If anyone out there knows how to get rid of something like this, please, for the love of God, help me. I'm at my breaking point. Hey Reddit, I don't even know why I'm posting this. Maybe it's because I'm hoping someone out there can save me. Maybe I'm just trying to keep myself from falling apart. Whatever the reason, I need to get this out. I need someone to hear me. After leaving the diner, I decided to head back to my hometown. I figured maybe if I went back to where it all started, I could find some answers. It was a long drive, but I had nowhere else to go. My nerves were shot, and every little noise made me jump. I kept seeing shadows in the rearview mirror, but I forced myself to keep driving. When I finally got to my hometown, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. It was like coming home, but with the knowledge that I was bringing something horrible with me. I went straight to my mum's house, hoping that maybe being around family would help. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed to stay for a while. She was worried, but she welcomed me in. The first night back was almost normal. My mum made dinner, we talked about mundane things, and for a little while, I felt almost human again. But that night, it found me. I woke up to the sound of whispers, louder than ever. My room was freezing and I could see my breath in the air. The figure was there, standing at the foot of my bed, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It reached out a hand and I felt a searing pain in my chest, like it was burning me from the inside out. The whispers turned into screams, and I thought I was going to die. Just when I couldn't take it anymore, it vanished, leaving me gasping for air and drenched in sweat. The next morning, I had a mark on my chest, a handprint burned into my skin. I showed my mum, and she freaked out, insisting that I go to the hospital. But I knew it wouldn't help. They'd just think I was crazy, and maybe I am. I convinced her that I was fine, just stressed, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Desperate, I reached out to an old friend, Sarah, who was into all that paranormal stuff. She'd always been a bit of an oddball, but if anyone could help, it was her. I told her everything, and she agreed to meet up. We went to a quiet cafe, and I spilled my guts, leaving out none of the terrifying details. Sarah listened, her face growing more serious by the minute. When I was done, she told me about a ritual that might help. It was risky and dangerous, but at this point I didn't care. I was willing to try anything. She gave me a list of items to gather: candles, salt, a mirror, and a few other things I didn't recognize. She said we needed to perform the ritual at midnight in a place where the veil between worlds was thin. We decided on the old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. It was creepy as hell, but it felt right. We gathered everything we needed and headed out there. The night air heavy with tension. The church was exactly as I remembered, decaying, overgrown, and utterly terrifying. We set up inside, placing the candles in a circle and spreading the salt around us. Sarah had me hold the mirror, and she began to chant in a language I didn't understand. The air grew colder, and I could feel the presence of the figure lurking just beyond the circle of light. As Sarah chanted, I saw the figure in the mirror, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It moved closer, and I could feel its hatred, its desire to drag me into whatever hell it came from. The mirror grew hot in my hands, and I struggled to keep my grip. The figure reached out, its hand pressing against the glass, and I felt that searing pain again. Sarah's chanting grew louder, more intense. The candles flickered, and the salt circles seemed to glow faintly. The figure's hand began to push through the mirror, and I could feel its icy touch on my skin. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Sarah shouted something, and there was a blinding flash of light. The figure screamed, a sound that pierced my very soul, and then it was gone. The mirror shattered in my hands, and I collapsed, exhausted and in pain. Sarah helped me up, her face pale and drawn. She said we had banished it, but only temporarily. It would come back, and next time, it would be even stronger. I don't know what to do. I'm running out of options, and I'm terrified that the next time it finds me, I won't be able to fight it off. If anyone out there has any other ideas, please, I'm begging you, help me. I can't keep living like this. Hey Reddit, this is probably the last time I'll be able to post. Things have escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm at the end of my rope here, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Here's what's happened since my last update. After the ritual at the church, I was more shaken than ever. The temporary banishment gave me a bit of relief, but knowing it was only a matter of time before it came back stronger left me constantly on edge. I decided to stay with Sarah, hoping her knowledge could keep me safe for a bit longer. The first couple of nights were uneventful. Sarah's place was filled with protective charms, crystals, and herbs. She did everything she could to make me feel safe, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We both knew it was just a matter of time. 3 nights ago, it came back. We were in her living room, talking about what else we could try. Suddenly, all the candles blew out, and the temperature dropped. The familiar whispers started again, this time louder, almost deafening. Sarah grabbed my hand, and we moved to the center of the room, where she had drawn a protective circle. The figure appeared, more terrifying than ever. It was larger, its features more defined. Its eyes glowed with an intense hatred, and it spoke directly to me, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You belong to me. You can't escape." Sarah started chanting again, but this time it didn't seem to have any effect. The figure stepped into the circle, and the candles around us flickered and went out. I could feel its cold presence pressing in on me, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Sarah screamed at me to focus, to fight it. She threw a handful of salt at the figure, and it hissed, retreating slightly. But it wasn't enough. It reached out, its hand wrapping around my throat. I could feel its icy grip tightening, and the world started to go dark. Just when I thought it was over, Sarah did something I'll never forget. She grabbed a knife from the table and sliced her own palm, letting the blood drip onto the floor. She chanted something I couldn't understand, and the blood started to glow. The figure recoiled, screaming in rage and pain. The light from the blood grew brighter, and the figure seemed to dissolve, its screams fading into the distance. The air grew warmer, and I collapsed, gasping for breath. Sarah fell beside me, exhausted and pale from blood loss. We thought it was over. We thought we had finally banished it for good. But last night proved us wrong. I woke up to Sarah screaming. I ran to her room and found her thrashing in her bed, her body covered in deep, bloody scratches. The figure was there, more monstrous than ever. It looked at me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was angrier than I'd ever seen it, and I knew this was the end. I grabbed the knife Sarah had used and stepped into the room, chanting the words I had heard her say. The figure turned its attention to me, its eyes burning with fury. It lunged, and I felt its icy hand wrap around my wrist, squeezing so hard I thought it would break. But I didn't stop. I kept chanting, louder and louder, until the words were all I could hear. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the walls and made my ears ring. It released me, recoiling as the light from the blood on the knife grew brighter. In a final, desperate move, I plunged the knife into the ground, right in the center of the room. The light exploded, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. The figure screamed one last time, then disintegrated, the darkness lifting. When the light faded, Sarah was unconscious but alive. The scratches on her body were gone, and the air was warm again. I collapsed, exhausted, knowing we had won, but at a great cost. Sarah is still recovering, but she's alive. I'm staying with her, keeping watch, hoping this is truly the end. I don't know if it's gone for good, but for now, we have peace. I've learned one thing from all of this. Some things are not meant to be messed with. I'm signing off now, hoping this is the last time I have to relive this nightmare. If you're reading this, take my advice. Stay away from things you don't understand. The darkness is real, and it's not worth the risk.